My name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. Today's video is going to be taking a look at domestic abuse. When I'm talking about domestic abuse, I'm not just talking about physical violence. Abuse can also be financial, emotional, or psychological. It can happen to anyone, regardless of your gender, your sexuality, your ethnicity, or your age. It may be a husband or a boyfriend abusing their wife or their girlfriend, or it might even be a wife or girlfriend who is the abuser. In some cases, it can also be the offspring. I've talked to people about domestic abuse in the past, and the conversation normally includes me pointing out that abuse can be emotional as well. Almost everyone that I've spoken to agrees with me. However, some people have said that psychological abuse is worse. They tell me that you can heal a broken bone or a bruise, but psychological abuse takes longer to heal. While psychological abuse does take longer time to recover from, those who are experiencing physical abuse will also sometimes be psychologically abused and manipulated. I've covered this subject a couple of times, but I think it's an important subject to keep bringing up and keep talking about. Domestic abuse can be evident in a number of ways. They can be excessively jealous and possessive. Domestic abuse could be a person who's charming and loving one minute and then abusive the next. They might isolate their victims slowly and steer you away from family and from friends. They may constantly criticise you or put you down or embarrass you in front of friends or family. They might tell you that you're useless and that you couldn't cope without them or you couldn't control your finances. They might tell you what to wear, who to see, where to go, what to think. They might threaten, intimidate or hit you, smash furniture up, frighten you into complying with their demands. They might monitor your movements or check up on you via email, Facebook, Twitter, or by looking through your phone at text messages. The list goes on and on. But the point is, domestic abuse can take many forms. Perpetrators will usually start abusing their victim by limiting their personal freedoms, monitoring every move, and stripping away the control of a person's life. Physical violence often comes quite a lot later in that abuse. Coercive control creates invisible chains and a sense of fear within the victim that permeates every element of their life. It works to limit their human rights by depriving them of liberty and reducing their ability to be able to take action. Experts like Evan Stark liken coercive control to being taken hostage. He says the victim becomes captive in an unreal world created by the abuser, entrapped in a world of confusion, contradiction, and fear. An abuser might do many things, such as isolating you from your friends and family, from the support that you need. They might deprive you of basic needs, such as food or money. Control is a very important aspect to this, and so the abuser may monitor your social media or any other forms of communication that you have. It's common for an abuser to put their partner down all the time by humiliating or degrading them and saying things such as "you're worthless," and that can be both in private and in public. It isn't necessarily actual violence that the abuser uses to force their victims into complying with their demands. Sometimes it's more powerful to simply have the threat of violence there. They want their victim to be able to feel powerless, to feel worthless, and feel as though they're unable to leave that relationship. Analysis of Merseyside Police domestic abuse data found that 95% of coercive control victims were women and 74% of perpetrators were men. 76% of coercive control cases happen within an intimate partner context. The study by Barlow and colleagues found that common abusive behaviours used in coercive control included the use of technology, such as phone trackers, controlling social media usage, barraging the person with text messages or monitoring their phone usage, sexual coercion, monitoring their behaviour, isolating, issuing threats, financial abuse. They might deprive people avenues and access to support, and they may also use physical violence as well. 63% of coercive control cases featured reports of physical violence as well. One study of data from the Crime Survey for England and Wales found that women are far more likely than men to be victims of domestic abuse that involves an ongoing degradation and frightening threats, which are two of the key elements of coercive control. Those who are more physically or mentally abusive can show so much love and kindness that it's easy to find ways for their partner to forgive them. Abusers tend to love bomb you. They're so loving, they're so affectionate, and between the instances of violence or abuse, there's this abundance of love and caring. And I know firsthand that if you're in that situation, it feels so good to have those in-between moments that you end up staying. There are millions of people who love their partner, and as such they're willing to believe them when they lie and say that they're sorry and they promise that it won't happen again. It will happen again. As much as you don't want to believe it, it will carry on until you leave. Albert Baden was a social scientist for the US Air Force. Bideman wrote an article in 1957 which was entitled "Communist Attempts to Elicit False Confessions from Air Force Prisoners of War." He'd interviewed American prisoners returning from North Korea, some of whom had been filmed by their Chinese interrogators, confessing to germ warfare and other such atrocities. Those orchestrated confessions led to allegations that the American prisoners had been somewhat brainwashed, and it provoked the military to revamp its training to give some military personnel a taste of the enemy's harsh methods to inoculate them against quick capitulation if captured. The results of these coercive tactics were laid out in what's widely known as Bideman's chart of coercion. These methods were based primarily on simple, easily understandable ideas of how an individual's physical and moral strength can be undermined. The chart is designed to demonstrate and explain the coercive methods of stress manipulation used to torture prisoners of war. However, it's also been applied to explain the coercive techniques used by predators in domestic abuse. In her groundbreaking book, Rape in Marriage, Diana Russell presented two lists side by side: Bideman's chart of coercion and the common techniques of domestic abuse perpetrators. The lists were virtually identical. The only difference was that whereas captives in North Korea deployed techniques tactically, husbands in her study appeared to be replicating the system of coercive control subconsciously. Harvard psychiatrist and trauma specialist Judith Herman wrote, "The coercive methods that enable one human being to enslave another are remarkably consistent. In situations of domestic abuse, the effect of coercive control is the same. The perpetrator becomes the most powerful person in the victim's life, and their psychology is shaped by the perpetrator's actions and beliefs. Domestic abuse perpetrators don't need physical violence to maintain their power. They only have to make their victims believe that they are capable of such violence." Furthermore, Herman wrote that this threat is particularly effective when it's directed towards loved ones. She wrote, "Battered women, for example, frequently report that their abuser has threatened to kill the children, their parents, or any friends who harbour them should they attempt to escape. The atmosphere of threat is enough to convince the victim that the perpetrator is omnipotent, that resilience is futile, and that her life depends on winning his indulgence through absolute compliance." Today, we know that the techniques common to domestic abuse match those by practically anyone who trades in captivity. Kidnappers, hostage takers, pimps, cult leaders, they all use these coercive control tactics. Now, what this reveals is that there's nothing uniquely weak, helpless, or masochistic about victims of domestic abuse. Faced with universal methods of coercive control, their responses are no different from those of trained soldiers. Knowing all that we know from research conducted on these behaviours has come a long way in recent years. In 2015, it became an offence to be coercive and manipulating within a relationship. Not too many years ago, it was believed that a husband couldn't rape his wife. But what's the point of all this knowledge if a person doesn't realise that they're the victim of abuse? When it comes to acts of violence, it's easy to define that as being abusive. With non-violent tactics, it isn't always easy for the victim to know that they're being abused, especially not when it first begins. If you're experiencing abuse of any kind, I'm not here to tell you that you should leave that relationship immediately. I just want to possibly help you or somebody that you know to be able to identify any behaviours that are problematic. A controlling partner will try to cut you off from friends and family or limit their contact with you so that you don't receive the support that you need. This isn't always obvious though. They might suggest, for example, sharing a phone or sharing social media accounts simply for convenience. They might suggest moving far away from where your family lives so that it's hard for them to visit you. They could monitor your phone calls with your family and cut the line off if anyone tries to intervene. They might even try and convince you that your family hates you and doesn't want to talk to you. Does your partner monitor you throughout the day? They might insist on having cameras around the house. It's easy to be talked into having a doorbell camera for security reasons. But if they then start to question you about where you're going or why a person has come to the door, then it's abusive, it's problematic. Someone exerting coercive control might try to control your freedom of movement and your independence. They might, for example, not allow you to go to school or college or work. They might restrict your access to transport. The abuser must always be right. They will then try to force their victim to acknowledge this and reinforce it. They'll manipulate, lie, and gaslight to get their own way and to convince you that you're the one in the wrong. Say your partner comes home from work expecting dinner to be served. They said that they wanted chicken for dinner before they left, and when you serve dinner they might throw it on the floor or scream or moan or yell and tell you that they wanted burgers, claiming that you're the stupid one because you couldn't follow simple directions. You might then find yourself questioning your own memory, apologising and possibly remaking that dinner. They might put you down or ridicule or criticise you. They want you to feel unimportant or unworthy. Regardless of the type of relationship that you have, your partner might try to make a distinction between who functions as the man and the woman in the relationship, or, who's the more dominant one in the relationship, regardless of gender. Some abusers will attempt to justify that women are homemakers and mothers while men are breadwinners. And using that argument, they might coerce you into taking care of all the cleaning, cooking and all of the childcare. If you're someone who does have children, either with the abuser or with someone else, they might try to weaponise the children against you by telling them that you're a bad parent or belittling you in front of them. You might feel as though you're always walking on eggshells and that your body is no longer your own. Jealousy, complaining about the amount of time that you spend with friends and family, both on and offline, is a way for them to phase out and minimise your contact with the outside world. Abusers might make demands about the amount of times that you have sex each week and the kinds of activities that you perform. They might also demand to take sexual pictures or videos of you, or refuse to wear a condom, for example. If physical, emotional, or financial threats don't work as they desire them to, your abuser might try to use threats against others to control you. So, for example, your kids or your pets might be at risk. They might make threats of violence towards them. If you're in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Maintain communication with your support systems whenever possible. This is important regardless of your abuser's displeasure at that. You should also make sure that family and friends have all of your contact information and check in with you on a regular basis. Call a domestic violence hotline regularly. Keep track of where your nearest public phone is, for example, and periodically check your opinions with a professional. Practice how to get out safely. Teach your children to identify a safe space, such as a friend's house or the library, somewhere where they can go to for help, and teach them how to call the police. If you are in an abusive relationship, have a safety plan. When deciding to leave, victims should have a plan regarding where they're going to go and who they're going to stay with. It's important to recognise that the initial period of separation might be the most dangerous time in terms of an abuser attempting to reconcile, both through legal and illegal conduct. I do hope that today's video you found it interesting and you enjoyed the content. I do hope that this video helps at least one person out there. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.